My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 28, a Harvard graduate and a financial analyst in Boston. Every month, I send my parents $600 for their mortgage plus $800 for bills, yet they still treat me like the family disappointment. Growing up, nothing I did was enough. My little brother Kevin was their golden boy, while my awards meant nothing. When Dad lost his job at 58, I moved back to save the house, thinking maybe they'd finally see my worth. But after 3 years of paying their bills without gratitude, everything exploded on Thanksgiving. That night, I realized I'd spent my entire life funding a family who never truly wanted me. My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 28 years old. On paper, I'm everything parents say they want their children to become. I have a Harvard degree in economics. I work as a financial analyst managing multi-million-dollar portfolios at one of Boston's top firms. And I live alone in a high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Some days I stand by that window with my coffee before dawn and think, this is it. This is what freedom looks like. But the truth is, I've never felt free. Every month when I log into my bank account to transfer Shaq's or $600 for my parents' mortgage, plus another $800 for their bills and groceries, I feel like I'm still that desperate little girl handing over her report card with straight A's, hoping for a smile or a pat on the head, and getting nothing but a distracted nod. Growing up in the Morgan household taught me two things very early on. One, love is conditional. Two, no matter how hard you try, some people will never see you. My father, Harold, worked as a project supervisor for a construction company, and my mother, Linda, was a librarian. We weren't rich, but we were stable. At least until Dad lost his job at 58. But even before that, there was always an unspoken rule in our family. Kevin, my younger brother by 3 years, was the golden child, and I was the burden with the book obsession. I still remember the first time I realized it. I was 9 and I won my school's regional spelling bee. I came home clutching the trophy like it was proof of my worth. Dad was watching Kevin practice football drills in the backyard. I ran out breathless with excitement. Dad, I won. I beat everyone, even the 6th graders. He barely looked at me. That's great, Rachel. Kevin, keep your elbow up when you throw. I stood there, trophy in hand, feeling the sting of invisibility. Later that night at dinner, he didn't mention it. Mom asked if the spelling bee was that thing with the words. I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. Meanwhile, Kevin told them about throwing his first perfect spiral at age 7, and Dad beamed like he'd just signed an NFL contract. That pattern never changed. In high school, when I got accepted into Harvard with a partial scholarship, Dad just grunted, "Well, you always liked books." Kevin made varsity football as a freshman, and they threw a barbecue for the entire neighborhood to celebrate. I learned to stop expecting praise at home. I found validation in grades, internships, and later performance bonuses. But even as I built my career brick by brick, my worth still felt like it depended on their approval I never got. After graduation, I landed my job at Beacon Financial Partners. I was proud. I felt like I had finally escaped. I got an apartment in Cambridge, visited home occasionally, and kept conversations polite but distant. Then 3 years ago, Dad called on a Tuesday evening. His voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. He'd been laid off. At 58, with no college degree and a mortgage 3 months behind, he had nowhere to go. Mom was working extra shifts at the library, and Kevin was still figuring things out, living rent-free in their basement. Without hesitation, I moved back home to help. I told myself, this is my chance. They'll see I'm useful. I'm a good daughter. Maybe now they'll be proud. I set up automatic payments for their mortgage, paid off their overdue utilities, and started covering groceries. Just until Dad finds something new, Mom said. That was 3 years ago. Since then, Dad picked up a part-time job at a hardware store, but it barely covers gas. Mom still works long hours. Kevin still doesn't pay rent. And me, I've paid $2,800 so far in mortgage payments alone. Add utilities, groceries, car insurance, and medical bills, and it's closer to $60,000, all from the daughter they never wanted to invest in. People at work see my tailored suits and designer handbags and think I have it all together. They don't see me crying in my car during lunch breaks because Dad sent another text about how I think I'm better than everyone. They don't hear Mom telling me I'm selfish if I mention feeling burned out. They don't know that every dollar I spend on myself carries guilt, like I'm stealing from the people who raised me, even if they never really raised me with love. Most days I tell myself this is temporary. One day they'll appreciate me. One day Dad will look at me and see someone to be proud of, not just a living wallet. But deep down, I know that day will never come, because love shouldn't have to be purchased. And yet I keep paying. Growing up in the Morgan household meant learning your place early on. For me, that place was somewhere between invisible and inconvenient. For Kevin, it was center stage under the brightest lights. Kevin was born when I was 3. Mom always said he was their miracle baby because she had struggled to conceive again after me. I didn't understand what that meant back then, only that from the moment he arrived, everything revolved around him. I became the helper. The little girl who fetched diapers, rocked his cradle, cleaned up toys. At 5 years old, I was praised for being a good sister, not for who I was, but for what I could do for him. Dad adored Kevin. He'd carry him around the house like a trophy, showing him off to neighbors and family friends. "Look at this little man," he'd say, bouncing him on his knee. "He's gonna play football just like his old man." Meanwhile, I'd sit in the corner with my books pretending not to care. But even then, I knew something was wrong. I was a quiet child, always reading, asking questions about the world, building imaginary kingdoms with words and paper. Dad didn't understand it. "Why are you wasting your time reading?" he'd scoff. "Go play outside. Help your mother do something useful." Mom wasn't much better. She never yelled, never insulted, but her indifference cut deeper. When I showed her my art project, she'd barely glance up from her crossword puzzles. "That's nice, Rachel," she'd mumble, eyes still scanning the page. It was as if I didn't exist outside of chores and quiet obedience. Kevin, on the other hand, could do no wrong. He threw tantrums in grocery stores, broke vases while playing football indoors, refused to finish homework, but to Mom and Dad, he was just a spirited boy. When I once accidentally spilled juice on Dad's paperwork at age 6, he screamed at me so harshly I sobbed for hours in my room. Kevin spilled an entire pot of coffee on Dad's laptop when he was 9, and Dad just laughed it off. Boys will be boys. In school, I excelled at everything academic. I won spelling bees, placed top in math competitions, and spent my lunch breaks reading advanced literature. Teachers praised me, classmates envied me, but at home it meant nothing. When I brought home certificates, Dad would shrug and say, "That's what you're supposed to do." But when Kevin made the middle school football team, Dad took him out for steak to celebrate. By the time I reached high school, the pattern was set in stone. Kevin started playing football seriously. Friday nights were family events with Mom wearing his jersey number and Dad standing on the sidelines like an assistant coach. I remember one freezing November night wrapped in blankets on the bleachers, watching Kevin throw a winning touchdown. Dad lifted him onto his shoulders, chanting his name with the crowd. Kevin's eyes were alight with joy. I clapped and cheered, too smiling despite the chill seeping through my bones. I was proud of him. I always was. But deep down, I wondered what it would feel like to be lifted onto Dad's shoulders, to hear him chant my name with pride. I wondered what it would feel like to be enough. When college decisions came, Kevin was still in high school dreaming of football scholarships. I got accepted into Harvard. I remember the day the acceptance letter arrived. My hands trembled as I ripped open the envelope. Congratulations. The word blurred with my tears. I had done it. I ran downstairs, waving the letter heart, pounding with hope. Dad was in the kitchen, drinking coffee. Dad, I got into Harvard. He glanced up, then back at his mug. That's good. You always liked books. That was it. No hug, no smile, no celebration. That night he ordered pizza to celebrate Kevin getting a B+ in chemistry. I ate a cold slice in my room while filling out my FAFSA forms, wondering why being smart was never as impressive as throwing a football. I learned to stop showing them my achievements. I learned that my worth at home was measured not by what I accomplished, but by how well I served. Kevin became the family's pride, their hope, their joy. I became the responsible one, the backup plan, the quiet disappointment who never quite fit. And even now, as an adult paying their bills, I remain that same little girl watching from the sidelines, wondering what it feels like to be the child they actually wanted. When people talk about childhood, they remember warmth, bedtime stories, birthday cakes, parents clapping proudly at school plays. For me, childhood was a quiet battlefield where love felt like a prize I could never win. I still remember third grade awards day. I'd spent weeks studying for the spelling bee, writing words over and over in my notebook until my fingers cramped. When they announced my name as champion, my heart nearly burst. I clutched that cheap gold plastic trophy like it was made of diamonds. After school, I raced to the pickup line, scanning for Dad's old Chevy truck, desperate to show him I was worth noticing. When I opened the door, grinning with my trophy, he didn't even glance at it. Buckle up, he said, eyes on the road. On the way home, he spent 15 minutes lecturing me about not forgetting to rake leaves that afternoon. Not a single word about the spelling bee. That evening, Mom asked what the trophy was for. I told her. She gave a half smile and went back to peeling potatoes. "That's nice, Rachel," she murmured. That was her catchphrase. "That's nice, Rachel." 4 words that felt like a locked door closing in my face. Meanwhile, Kevin was sprawled on the couch watching cartoons, eating the last pudding cup I'd saved for myself. Dad ruffled his hair and said, "That's my boy," just because he was breathing. In 5th grade, I auditioned for the school play. I got the lead role. Every day after rehearsal, I stayed late memorizing lines, helping the drama teacher with props, making sure everything was perfect. Opening night, I scanned the crowd, hoping to see my parents. They never came. Kevin had a Pop Warner game the same night. Dad said, "You'll have other plays." Kevin only gets 1 championship. When I got home still wearing my stage makeup, Dad told me to wash it off before dinner because I looked ridiculous. Kevin walked in wearing a gold medal, and they spent the evening recounting every second of his game while I silently ate my food, my cheeks burning with leftover blush and humiliation. By middle school, I stopped telling them about my achievements. Straight A's became expected, not celebrated. When I brought home a report card with all 100s, except 198 in algebra, Dad frowned and said, "What happened in math?" Kevin brought home a C+ in English, and Mom kissed his forehead. "At least you tried, sweetie." At night, I lay awake listening to the house creak in the winter wind, wondering what was wrong with me. Why didn't they love me like they loved him? I read books about brave girls, clever girls, girls who saved kingdoms and slayed dragons, imagining that if I just worked hard enough someday, I'd slay the dragon of their indifference too. But dragons are easier to kill than indifference. In high school, the gap widened further. I became valedictorian captain of the debate team and a national merit scholar. Kevin made varsity football as a freshman. They threw him a barbecue with balloon steaks and neighbors congratulating Dad on raising such a fine young man. When I told Dad I won first place in state-level debate, he didn't even look up from his newspaper. "You planning on making money talking in circles?" he asked. I learned to keep my pride private. I hung my medals and certificates in my closet, hidden behind sweaters. They became my secret proof that I mattered at least somewhere. But no matter what I did, Kevin was always enough just for existing, while I was never enough, no matter how hard I tried. By the time I reached high school graduation, I had stopped hoping for recognition. It wasn't a conscious decision, more like a gradual erosion of expectation. Each time I ran home with a spelling bee trophy or an exam score taped proudly to my folder, their distracted nods chipped away at my hope until it became too thin to stand on. But somewhere deep inside, like the last ember clinging to a burned-out log, a small flicker of hope still glowed. Harvard had always been my dream, not just for the prestige or the education, but because I believed, foolishly perhaps, that if I got into Harvard, they'd finally see me. Really see me. The daughter who had been there all along. When the acceptance email arrived, I remember sitting frozen at my desk, staring at the screen as tears welled up and spilled down my cheeks. Congratulations. The word felt unreal, a syllable too heavy for my trembling chest to hold. I read it again and again, heart thundering against my ribs as if trying to burst free to celebrate on its own. My hand shook as I grabbed my phone to call Mom at work. My voice came out as a choked whisper laced with disbelief and euphoria. I got in. I got into Harvard. There was a pause, the silence stretching so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Then she sighed. "That's good, Rachel. We'll talk about tuition later. I have to get back to shelving books." The line went dead before I could say anything else. I sat there listening to the dial tone my acceptance letter glowing on the screen like a lighthouse for ships that would never dock. That evening, I printed out the email and placed it on the kitchen table, smoothing the paper again and again, hoping Dad would see it the moment he walked in. Hoping he'd smile at me the way he smiled at Kevin after football games, pride unhidden in his eyes. When he came home, he glanced at the paper with fleeting disinterest. "You always liked books," he muttered, cracking open a beer and sinking into the couch as ESPN blared in the background. Meanwhile, Kevin had been benched for most of his sophomore football season after pulling a hamstring. At dinner, Dad spooned mashed potatoes onto his plate and reassured him over and over that next year would be his time to shine. "Don't let it get to you, son. You're going to show them what you're made of." I sat there silently picking at my overcooked pasta, trying to picture what life would be like in Cambridge, wondering if when I left they'd even notice I was gone. When senior awards night rolled around, I walked across the stage 6 times, receiving scholarships and academic medals that jingled around my neck like little symbols of worth I hoped someone would acknowledge. After the ceremony, I watched other parents hugging their kids, tight cheeks pressed together for photos, bouquets cradled in their arms, balloons bobbing above their heads like cheerful witnesses. My parents weren't there. Kevin had football conditioning that evening. I stood alone near the exit doors until my English teacher, Mrs. Brighton, approached. She gave me a gentle smile and asked if I wanted a photo with her instead. I nodded, my throat burning with tears. I refused to let fall in front of her. Later that night, she emailed me the picture with the caption, "Never let them dim your light, Rachel." I lay in bed clutching my phone, reading her words over and over until the screen blurred sobbing silently into my pillow as I wondered why my own parents couldn't see that light. College was supposed to be my escape, and in many ways it was. Harvard challenged me in ways that electrified my mind, shaped me into a sharper thinker, and gave me friends who celebrated my achievements without resentment or dismissal. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But each time I went home for Thanksgiving or winter break, I was reminded that no matter what I accomplished out there in the world at home, I was still just Rachel, the girl who read too much, talked too little, and never quite fit the mold they wanted her to fill. I remember the summer after sophomore year, I landed an investment banking internship in New York, one of the most competitive programs in the country. My chest buzzed with pride as I called Dad to tell him, "It's really competitive." I gushed into the phone, smiling so wide my cheeks hurt. They only took 5 students out of hundreds. There was a pause before he answered in his usual gruff voice. "So, you're going to spend your summer stuck in an office instead of coming home to help your mother with the store." My smile faltered as he hung up without another word. Meanwhile, Kevin had failed 2 classes that semester. Dad bought him a used Ford truck to cheer him up, patting him on the back in the driveway, while Kevin ran his hands over the cracked leather seats, eyes glowing with joy. That same week, I sat in my dorm's silent common room, filling out forms for another student loan to cover my housing deposit for fall semester. By the time I graduated magna cum laude with job offers lined up from top firms before I even walked across the stage, I didn't bother inviting them to the ceremony. I sat alone in the stadium surrounded by hundreds of families cheering and clapping, holding handmade signs that read, "We love you," and "Proud Mom." When my name was called, I clapped for myself, swallowing the lump in my throat as tears threatened to spill. I told myself I didn't need them to be proud of me, that I was strong enough to hold my own head high without their approval. But the truth was, I did need it. I always had. No matter how high I climbed, no matter how far I went, or how brightly I burned, my success remained invisible at home. Kevin's mediocrity outshone my excellence because it was never about what we achieved. It was about who they chose to love. And they never chose me. College became my lifeline. After graduating from Harvard, I accepted an offer from Beacon Financial Partners in Boston before I even crossed the stage. It was a top-tier firm with competitive pay, excellent benefits, and prestige that made professors nod in approval when I told them. My starting salary was $95,000. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. I moved into a small studio in Cambridge with peeling paint, but tall windows that flooded the room with morning light. Every morning, I brewed coffee before dawn, looking out over the city thinking I made it out. I did it. I kept contact with my family, polite but distant. I called on holidays. I drove home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, bringing expensive wines they never drank, gifts they barely unwrapped. When I left, I always sat in the car for a few minutes in silence, feeling an invisible weight lift off my chest as their house disappeared in my rearview mirror. Then 3 years ago, everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening in February. I just finished a 12-hour workday running quarterly analyses for a $300 million portfolio. My phone buzzed. Dad's name flashed on the screen. We rarely spoke unless I called on holidays, so I felt a jolt of anxiety as I answered. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" For the first time in my life, his voice sounded small, defeated. "I got laid off today." I blinked at the empty office around me. Laid off. What happened? Companies restructuring. They don't need a site supervisor anymore. They gave me a 2-week severance. That's it. I felt a tightness in my chest. What about the mortgage silence? "Dad, how many payments behind are you?" 3 months, he muttered. "They've sent foreclosure warnings." I swallowed hard, feeling the fluorescent lights buzz above me. 3 months behind. Foreclosure notices. My childhood home might be taken away. The place where I learned to ride a bike in the cracked driveway, where I spent nights reading under blankets to escape the world outside my door. Despite everything, I couldn't let that happen. "Don't worry," I said quietly. "I'll take care of it." That night, I lay awake in my tiny apartment staring at the ceiling. The snow outside fell in thick, silent sheets. I wondered what I was doing. Why was it my responsibility to save the house of people who never truly loved me? But the thought of Mom and Dad losing everything felt unbearable. Maybe deep down, I still believed that if I saved them, they'd finally see me as a daughter worth loving. The next week, I drove home and set up automatic payments for the mortgage, $600 each month. I covered the overdue utilities and stocked their fridge. Dad couldn't find a new job. At 58, with no degree and decades in construction, no company wanted to hire him back at his old salary. He eventually picked up part-time shifts at a hardware store for minimum wage. Mom took extra hours at the library shelving books until her back ached. Kevin. He was still living in the basement, jobless, playing video games until 3 in the morning. Mom called him my sweet boy, who just needs time to figure things out. And me? I drove back to Boston that Sunday evening feeling like a hollowed-out version of myself. I kept paying their mortgage, their electric bill, their water, internet, car insurance, just until Dad finds something new, Mom said. That was 3 years ago. I've paid over $800 in mortgage payments alone since then. If you count the bills, groceries, insurance, and medical costs I covered, it's closer to $60,000. Every month the transfers go through automatically, and every month I feel like I'm draining pieces of myself into a black hole of thanklessness. People think success means freedom. But for me, success meant becoming the family ATM while still being treated like I wasn't enough. I kept telling myself it was temporary. That one day Dad would find a new job, Mom would thank me for keeping them afloat, and maybe, just maybe, they'd look at me and feel proud. But deep down, I knew the truth. I could pay their bills for the rest of their lives, and it still wouldn't buy me the love I craved. Moving back home wasn't part of my plan. I told myself it was temporary just until Dad found another job, until the mortgage stabilized, until Kevin stepped up. But deep down, I think I knew I was returning to the same battlefield I'd spent my entire life trying to escape. I packed my work laptop, a week's worth of office clothes, and drove back to my childhood home on a rainy Sunday afternoon. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the peeling paint on the porch railings, the rust stains streaking down the gutter. The house felt tired, like it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to rescue it. Inside, Mom was in the kitchen chopping carrots for stew. She glanced up as I walked in, her eyes flicking to the suitcase behind me. "You're staying?" she asked, voice neutral. For a while, I replied softly, "I'll work remotely this week." She nodded without emotion and returned to her carrots. Dad was sitting in his recliner, staring blankly at the muted TV. Kevin was upstairs playing video games, his laughter echoing down the hall. I set down my bags and went to my old room. It still smelled faintly of lavender and stale dust. On the desk sat my high school valedictorian plaque, the gold lettering dulled by time. That evening, I set up automatic mortgage payments from my account, $1,600 on the first of every month. I also paid the overdue electric bill $437 and the water bill $192. I ordered groceries for the week, organic produce, lean meats, almond milk for Mom's cholesterol. The total came to $278. When the confirmation email arrived, I stared at the screen, feeling a strange mix of guilt and relief. Guilt for resenting them, relief for being able to save them. Maybe now they'd see I wasn't a failure. Maybe now they'd finally love me. But love wasn't what I got. That first week back felt like living in someone else's life. Dad shuffled around the house in sweatpants, avoiding my eyes. When he did speak, it was with clipped annoyance. "You working today?" he asked a Wednesday morning as I brewed coffee in the kitchen. "Yeah, I have a meeting with the managing partners at 10. He snorted. "Must be nice sitting at a computer all day." I swallowed the hurt and stirred my coffee in silence. Mom was no different. When I offered to help with dinner, she waved me away. "You're busy with your fancy job. Go sit down." Her words weren't cruel, but the way she said fancy job carried an undercurrent of disdain, as if my success was some frivolous hobby instead of the reason they still had a roof over their heads. Kevin didn't acknowledge me at all. He stayed in the basement, emerging only for meals grunting one-word responses if I asked how he was. One afternoon, as I worked from the dining room table, I overheard him complaining to Mom, "Why does she have to be here? She thinks she's better than us." Mom sighed. "She's just trying to help. Don't mind her. Don't mind her," as if I were a passing inconvenience instead of the person paying their bills. I tried to remind myself why I was there. Every time I transferred money, I imagined it was buying me something intangible, approval, gratitude, belonging. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Dad still hadn't found a full-time job. His part-time shifts at the hardware store paid barely enough for his gas and cigarettes. Mom kept working overtime shelving books at the library, her knees aching every night. Kevin still slept until noon, gaming until sunrise. 3 months in my apartment lease in Boston expired. I didn't renew it. I told myself it was more practical to stay home until Dad stabilized. I set up a small desk in my childhood bedroom, trading my view of the Charles River for peeling floral wallpaper. I kept telling myself just a little longer, just until things get better. But the truth was, I didn't know who I was without this role, the rescuer, the provider, the daughter trying to prove she deserved to exist. 3 years later, I'm still here. I've paid over $800 in mortgage alone. Add utilities, groceries, insurance repairs, and the number creeps towards $60,000. Sometimes I calculate how much that money could have built for my own life, a down payment on a condo, a solo trip to Italy, investments freedom. But every time I think about leaving, guilt strangles the thought before it can breathe. Because what kind of daughter abandons her family when they need her? What kind of daughter keeps paying for love that never comes? Thanksgiving had always been Kevin's holiday. Every year since he made varsity football, Dad would roast the biggest turkey he could find, and Kevin's friends would come over to watch the game on our ancient living room TV. Mom would bake 2 kinds of pie pecan for Dad pumpkin for Kevin humming softly as she worked the dough with deft fingers while I sat at the end of the kitchen table peeling potatoes, trying to stay out of the way, yet secretly hoping someone might notice I was there. But this year, I wanted things to be different. For the first time in my life, I asked if we could have Thanksgiving at my apartment in Boston. I phrased it like an offer, though really it was a plea. Come into my world for once. Let me feed you. Let me show you who I've become. Mom hesitated on the phone, asking if I was sure, because it was a lot of work, and I quickly said I wanted to, that I'd already planned the menu. She only replied that Kevin preferred Dad's turkey anyway, saying mine last year was too dry. I swallowed the sting and forced a laugh, promising it would be perfect this time. For the next 2 weeks, I poured my heart into planning. I made spreadsheets for groceries and cooking timelines, watched hours of Gordon Ramsay's Thanksgiving specials, learned how to brine a turkey overnight in apple cider and fresh herbs. I ordered everything organic: rosemary, sage, thyme, Meyer lemons, ruby red cranberries, dark maple syrup, cinnamon sticks, hand-churned butter, spending $347 more than my parents spent on groceries in 2 weeks. But I didn't care. If I was going to feed them, I wanted it to be perfect. The night before, I cleaned my apartment top to bottom and set the dining table with my best dinnerware ivory plates with gold trim, burnt orange linen napkins folded into crisp triangles, brass candle holders with tall white tapers. I laid out place cards I wrote by hand, Dad, Mom, Kevin, my chest, filling with a painful hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment they'd see me. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke at 4:30 a.m. to prep the turkey, massaging it with lemon herb butter, sliding sprigs of rosemary under the skin. As it roasted, the apartment filled with the rich scent of garlic and thyme, and I basted it every 30 minutes, whispering silent prayers over the sizzling pan juices. At noon, they arrived. Dad walked in carrying a grocery store pecan pie with the sticker still on Kevin, trailing behind him with eyes glued to his phone, thumbs tapping at lightning speed, and Mom entering last, glancing around my apartment with cool indifference, simply saying it was nice in a flat voice. I forced a smile and told her dinner would be ready soon. She walked straight to the kitchen, lifted the foil on the turkey, asked if I'd basted it every half hour, and when I said yes, tension tightening my chest, she only replied with a quiet, before covering it back up. Kevin collapsed onto my couch without greeting me, kicked his shoes onto my cream rug, and asked for the Wi-Fi password without looking up. When I handed it to him and softly said, "Hi," he didn't hear me. Dad opened my fridge, grabbed one of my craft beers without asking, twisted off the cap, took a sip, and grimaced, muttering how real beer shouldn't taste like grapefruit before sitting at the table turning on the game on his phone at full volume. I finished the last dishes in silence, wiping my damp palms on my apron, telling myself not to ruin it, that this was my chance, that I had to hold it together. Finally, I brought out the food, herb roasted turkey with lemon butter, maple glazed carrots with fresh parsley garlic, mashed potatoes, whipped until silky sourdough, stuffing studded with caramelized onions and sweet apple cubes, cranberry orange relish with a hint of cinnamon, placing each dish on the table with careful reverence under flickering candlelight, and softly announced that dinner was ready. They sat. Dad scrolled through football stats as I poured sparkling apple cider into each glass. Kevin dug into the stuffing before Grace. Mom eyed the turkey, frowning, asking if I'd covered it with foil the whole time, and when I explained I had only for the first half before browning it, she just said, again. I asked Dad to say grace, and he sighed, set his phone down, closed his eyes, and thanked the Lord for the meal and for Kevin's upcoming job interview, asking that he get it so he could start supporting the family. Mom echoed amen quickly, while my cheeks burned as I stared at my plate, my appetite gone. Not a single mention of me, my home, my cooking, my job that paid for their mortgage. Just Kevin. Silence settled heavy over the table, broken only by chewing, and Kevin's occasional snort at something on his phone. Finally, Mom said the stuffing was dry, and when I whispered I was sorry, she explained that boxed breadcrumbs would do that I should have toasted fresh bread overnight. When I told her I did, she didn't hear me. Later, I brought out my homemade pumpkin cheesecake topped with cinnamon whipped cream rosettes. Mom took one bite and set her fork down, saying it was too sweet. Kevin didn't touch it. Dad belched and stood up to watch the game on my TV. Gathering the last shreds of courage, I said I got promoted last week, that I was managing a $300 million portfolio, now leading an entire team. My voice trembling with forced brightness. Dad scoffed without looking up, saying that wasn't real work, just playing with numbers on a computer screen, while Kevin's upcoming warehouse foreman interview was honest work. The words pierced so deep my vision blurred. I wanted to scream that I was paying their mortgage, that I was the reason they still had a home, but I stayed silent, swallowing the pain with a bitterness no dessert could mask. After dinner, as I scrubbed dishes alone in the dim kitchen, I glanced into the living room where Kevin snored on my couch. Dad flicked TV channels without asking, and Mom scrolled Facebook on her phone. The table sat empty, crumbs and turkey bones littering my ivory plates, candles burned down to puddles of wax. I thought about the 340 settler groceries, the days of planning, the hours of cooking, the years of bill payments. And in that moment, staring at my cracked dishpan hands, I realized something that made my chest ache with quiet finality. No matter how much I gave them, no matter how hard I tried, I would always be invisible. Dinner wasn't just silent, it was suffocating. As I sat there picking at my cold mashed potatoes, I could feel the tension pulsing under my skin like an electric current. Kevin was glued to his phone headphones, blasting some gaming video. Dad scrolled football stats occasionally, muttering under his breath about idiot coaches. Mom quietly scraped leftovers into Tupperware, her lips pressed in a thin, disapproving line. I tried again to start a conversation. "Kevin, what's your job interview for next week?" He didn't look up. "Warehouse foreman." He mumbled, eyes still locked on his phone. "That's great," I said softly. "I'm really proud of you." Dad snorted without looking up. Finally, he's going to do some real work. None of that office nonsense like you. My chest tightened. "What do you mean by that?" He sighed dramatically and set his phone down. "Rachel, you sit at a computer all day moving numbers around. Kevin's going to do honest labor, real work. That's something to be proud of." I blinked, fighting back tears. "I manage portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars, Dad." He rolled his eyes. Yeah, play money for rich people." Mom spoke up from the kitchen. "Don't start Harold. She's trying her best." Trying her best. Dad barked a humorless laugh. "She thinks she's better than everyone just because she got some fancy job, always flaunting her degrees, her promotions, her apartment." I stared at him, stunned. "I'm not flaunting anything. I'm just sharing. Isn't that what family does?" He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. "Family doesn't make you feel small every time you sit down to eat, Rachel." The room fell silent. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. For a moment, no one moved. Kevin kept his eyes on his phone, pretending not to hear. Mom washed dishes with mechanical precision, shoulders tense. I took a shaky breath. "Is that really how you see me? After everything I've done for you? For this family?" Dad glared at me, his eyes cold. "Everything you've done, you think throwing money at us makes you better, makes you our savior. We survived before you, and we'll survive after you." His words sliced through me like a serrated blade. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. "I never wanted to be your savior," I whispered. "I just wanted to be your daughter." Dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "Get out." I stared at him, confused. "What get out?" He repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "If you're going to sit here and act like you're better than us in your fancy apartment with your fancy dinner, get out. We didn't ask for your help." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. My throat tightened, choking back sobs. Kevin still didn't look up. Mom kept scrubbing dishes, her hands moving faster, her silence louder than any scream. Slowly, I pushed my chair back and stood. My legs felt numb as I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and pressed my back against it, sliding down until I sat crumpled on the floor. My chest heaved with silent cries. Every memory flashed before me, the spelling bee trophies ignored, the Harvard acceptance shrugged off the years of paying their bills unnoticed. I realized then that this wasn't just about Thanksgiving. This was my entire life condensed into a single dinner table, me giving everything I had, them taking without gratitude, and still believing I owed them more. Outside my door, I heard Dad open another beer. Kevin laughed at something on his phone. Mom quietly packed away the cheesecake I'd spent hours making, probably to throw it out later. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. A small, sharp flicker of anger cutting through the grief. A voice whispering, "You don't have to keep doing this. You don't owe them your life." I wiped my tears, stood up, and looked around my room, the same childhood room with peeling lavender wallpaper and dusty shelves lined with forgotten trophies. The room where I first learned love was something I had to earn. Not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in my childhood bed, staring at the hairline crack running across the ceiling, feeling the silence of the house pressing down on me like a weighted blanket soaked in unspoken words. My chest ached with anger and heartbreak, and over Dad's words echoed in my mind. Get out. At 5 a.m. before the sun rose, I got up. I moved quietly around my room, packing my laptop chargers and a week's worth of clothes into my duffel, my hands trembling with adrenaline as rage burned beneath my skin. As I zipped the bag shut, I felt something snap inside me. A dam I'd spent my entire life building, a dam made of silent endurance of, it's okay, and maybe next time, and I just want them to love me. When I walked into the kitchen, Mom stood at the sink washing the turkey roasting pan and turned when she heard me, her voice soft as she said, I was up early. I told her I was leaving my voice cold and calm, colder than I'd ever spoken to her. And when she wiped her hands on a dish towel and asked if I would be back tonight, I shook my head and told her no, I was leaving for good. Her brows furrowed as she told me not to be dramatic, and I laughed then, a short, bitter sound that tasted like blood in my mouth. Telling her dramatic was thinking I owed them everything just because I existed. I reminded her that I'd paid their mortgage for 3 years, covered their bills, their groceries, their car insurance, that I'd given up everything to keep this family afloat, and last night, Dad told me to get out of my own apartment because I made him feel small. She pressed her lips together and said he didn't mean it, but I snapped back that yes, he did. He meant every cruel thing he'd ever said to me, and so had she. Her eyes widened as she whispered that she had never been cruel, and I told her no, she hadn't been cruel. She'd been indifferent, and sometimes that hurt even worse. She turned away, then bracing herself against the counter, saying they never asked me to pay for anything, and I whispered exactly that they never asked, they just expected it, expected me to sacrifice everything because Kevin was their golden boy, and Dad's pride couldn't handle reality. From the hallway, I heard footsteps, and Dad walked in with his hair tousled and eyes bloodshot, asking what all this yelling was about. I told him I was leaving, and I was done paying their bills. His face darkened instantly as he told me not to dare threaten them, and I replied that it wasn't a threat, it was a decision. He stepped closer, then so close I could smell stale beer on his breath, his voice low and venomous, as he called me an ungrateful little bitch, saying after everything they'd done for me, this was how I repaid them. I felt my jaw clench as I asked him what exactly they had done for me really, because all I remembered was them ignoring my trophies, belittling my degree, calling my career worthless, making me feel like a burden every single day of my life. He sneered, then saying at least Kevin wasn't arrogant, at least Kevin respected his family. I let out a shaky breath as tears blurred my vision, telling him respect was Kevin living in their basement playing video games all day while I paid their mortgage, and still they thought he was worth more than me. His eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as he told me to get out, and I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of years lift off my shoulders as I said I would. I grabbed my duffel and walked past him, shoulders squared, heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs, and as I reached the door, I turned back one last time. I told him I used to think if I worked hard enough they'd love me, but now I realized nothing I ever did would be enough, and that wasn't my fault. It was theirs. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes, anger, regret, maybe fear, but I didn't stay to find out. I walked out the door into the freezing dawn air, my breath fogging in front of me as the sky streaked with purple and gold, a new day rising beyond the bare maple trees. I put my bag in the car, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of freedom, small, fragile, tinged with grief. But it was mine. And for once, I chose myself. I drove back to Boston without music, without podcasts, without any distraction to numb the ache in my chest. It was just me, the low hum of the highway beneath my tires, and the echo of Dad's words pounding in my skull like war drums. Get out. The words replayed on an endless loop, each syllable braided with every memory of dismissal I had ever collected like shards of broken glass. My spelling bee trophy. He ignored my Harvard acceptance, brushed off my promotions, belittled every sacrifice reduced to arrogance, every success twisted into an insult. The sun was rising as I pulled into the underground garage of my apartment building. Pale gold light poured between concrete pillars, illuminating the dust motes swirling around my windshield like tiny fireflies trapped in amber. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles, bone-white shoulders shaking. I wasn't crying, not exactly. Tears pricked my eyes, but they didn't fall. What I felt was deeper than sadness, deeper even than anger. It was a raw, burning clarity that seared everything in its path. I took the elevator up to my apartment. When the doors opened, I stepped into silence. My silence, my space. No dad grumbling about real work. No Kevin's gaming rants vibrating through thin walls. No mom scraping plates with passive aggression. Just silence deep and clean, wrapping around me like a balm. I dropped my duffel by the door, slipped off my shoes, and walked straight to my desk. I didn't even take off my coat. My reflection in the darkened window looked like a ghost hair, tangled eyes, bloodshot lips pressed into a thin, unbreakable line. I sat down, opened my laptop, and logged into my online banking, feeling my heart pound so hard I could taste metal in my mouth. I scrolled through the list of automatic payments, the mortgage, the electric bill, the water bill, the insurance, the grocery, auto load card, mom's prescription, co-pays. Line after line of obligation bleeding into each other until they spelled out a truth I had never let myself read clearly. This is your life, Rachel. Every dollar is a piece of you traded for a love that never came. My finger hovered over the cancel payment button for the mortgage. As memories flooded through me, Dad yelling at me for reading instead of cleaning Mom's empty. That's nice. Rachel, Kevin's smirk whenever Dad called me a know-it-all. Thanksgiving dinner just hours before Dad's prayer, thanking God for Kevin's job interview while ignoring the dinner I spent days preparing. My chest tightened, nausea rising in my throat as fear whispered its poison. What if they lose the house? What if Mom gets sick? What if Kevin ends up on the street? But beneath that fear was another voice, small but unflinching, clear as cut glass. What if you keep giving until there's nothing left of you? With a shaky exhale, I clicked cancel payment. A pop-up appeared asking if I was sure, and I clicked yes. I canceled the electric bill autopay, the water bill, the insurance, the grocery auto load. My hands moved with mechanical certainty, tears blurring the screen, but I kept going line after line, unshackling myself from every tether. When I finished, I sat back staring at the cleared payments list. The weight on my chest didn't lift instantly. Guilt still clawed at my ribs, my stomach twisted with dread at what their reactions would be. But underneath the guilt was something else. Something like oxygen-filling lungs that had been starved for years. Something that felt like freedom. I opened my email and drafted a message to my lawyer informing them that effective immediately, I would no longer be covering my parents' mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, or medical expenses, and requesting documentation to formalize the termination and protect me from future financial liability. I read it 3 times before hitting send. When it was gone, I closed my laptop and let my head fall into my hands. Hot tears finally spilled down my cheeks. I wept for everything for the little girl, clutching her spelling bee trophy for the teenager who hung medals inside her closet so no one would mock her, for the woman who believed love could be bought if she just paid enough bills. I wept for the family I always wanted and never had. When the tears stopped, I felt empty, hollow. But in that emptiness, there was space to breathe. Space to exist, space to finally become someone who belonged to herself. I walked to my bedroom, peeled off my coat, and crawled under the covers fully clothed. I slept for 6 hours straight, deeper than I had in months. When I woke, it was dusk, and the city outside my window glowed with thousands of lights flickering on like newborn stars. I made myself peppermint tea, wrapping my hands around the steaming mug as I stood by the window. Below, people walked dogs. laughed with friends, carried groceries home to warm kitchens. I wondered if any of them felt like I did, weightless and terrified all at once. My phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't check it. I knew what I'd find: angry texts from Dad calling me ungrateful, missed calls from Mom, guilt-laced voicemails from relatives telling me I was abandoning my duty. Kevin probably wouldn't text at all. I turned my phone face down. I sipped my tea and watched the skyline flicker to life, letting the quiet wash over me like a baptism. For the first time in 28 years, there was no one demanding a piece of me. No one siphoning my energy, my time, my money, my self-worth. Just me, Rachel Morgan, financial analyst, Harvard graduate, survivor of a family who never saw her, and now finally a woman choosing herself. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if I was strong enough to face the backlash. But as I stood there in the quiet glow of my apartment watching the city breathe, I felt something small and powerful ignite in my chest. Hope. And in that moment, I whispered aloud into the silence, tasting the words like a promise I had waited my whole life to make: I am enough. The backlash came fast, faster than I ever imagined. The next morning, my phone buzzed relentlessly. When I woke, there were 47 missed calls and dozens of unread texts. Dad's messages were the first to catch my eye, each one more furious than the last. He demanded to know what was wrong with me, called me ungrateful, told me to answer the phone, accused me of thinking I was better than them now, and finally ended with a cold command: never come back again. Mom's messages were quieter but sharper in their own way. She pleaded with me to call her, said Dad was very upset, told me she knew I was angry. But this was too much. She reminded me that they raised me, fed me, gave me a home, as if I hadn't been paying for that home for the last 3 years. Then came the relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly remembered my number. They told me my parents were devastated, that family meant sacrifice, that I was selfish, that they always knew I thought I was better than them. Grandma left a voicemail, her voice trembling with guilt and pity, begging me to call my mother because she was crying and that I couldn't just abandon my family like this. I sat on my couch reading each message with a numb detachment, as though I was watching someone else's life implode through a thick pane of glass. Guilt pricked at my chest, that old familiar ache, but it was fainter now, muted by a deeper exhaustion. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every word was a reminder of the silent contract I had lived under for 28 years, that I existed to serve them, that my worth was measured by obedience, that my voice did not matter. By noon, Dad showed up at my apartment door. He pounded so hard the walls shook, his voice roaring through the metal like thunder. He shouted at me to open up, demanded to know if I really thought I could just walk away from the family, hurled insults through the wood, with venom dripping from every syllable. His voice cracked with something almost like desperation, but I didn't move. I stood frozen in my kitchen, watching the door vibrate under his fists, my chest tight with panic and sorrow. I called building security. When they arrived, he had stopped banging. Through the peephole, I saw him slumped against the door-framed shoulders, heaving tears streaking his weathered face. The security guard spoke to him calmly and escorted him back to his truck. I slid down to the floor, knees pulled to my chest, sobs shaking my entire body. I didn't cry because I regretted it. I cried because grief is still grief, even when you're mourning something toxic. Even when you know leaving is the only way to survive. That evening, desperate for fresh air, I went to the grocery store to buy milk for my morning coffee. As I stood in the yogurt aisle scanning labels, I heard her voice behind me. When I turned, Mom stood there in her librarian cardigan, hair pulled back into its usual tight bun, eyes rimmed red from crying. She looked at me with quiet fury and asked how I could do this to them. My throat closed, but I managed to whisper that I didn't do anything to them. I just stopped paying to keep being hurt. her face twisted with anger and betrayal as she stepped closer, her voice trembling as she said they were my family. That family takes care of each other. Tears welled in my eyes as I replied barely audibly that they never really took care of me. Not truly. She snapped back that I shouldn't dare stand there and say they didn't care. My chest tightened as I asked if they ever really cared about me or just what I could do for them. For a long moment, she just stared at me, breathing hard, jaw clenched. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away, pushing her cart down the aisle until she disappeared behind shelves of pasta sauce. I stood frozen in place, trembling so violently I thought my knees might give out. As I drove home, I kept replaying her face in my mind, the disbelief, the anger, the refusal to understand. When I got back to my apartment, I collapsed onto my couch, clutching the carton of milk against my chest like an anchor. I didn't move for hours. I just sat there staring at the dark window as the city lights flickered on one by one, feeling grief wash over me in endless waves. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Today I lost the family I always wanted. But maybe I never really had them to begin with." And as painful as that truth was underneath it, bloomed a small, stubborn relief. Because at least now I wasn't pretending anymore. Weeks passed. At first, every morning felt like waking up on a battlefield strewn with invisible landmines of guilt. I'd open my eyes to the pale morning light streaming across my bedroom ceiling, my heart already racing with fear. I kept expecting the pounding knock on my door, Dad's voice booming down the hallway, demanding explanations I no longer owed him. I kept expecting Mom to call, her voice cracking with tears, guilt dripping from every syllable. I kept expecting Kevin to text, even if it was just to tell me I was selfish. But the calls slowed. Then they stopped altogether. Their silence settled over my life like freshly fallen snow cold, at first numbing, terrifying in its emptiness. But as the days turned into weeks, that silence softened. What once felt like exile began to feel like peace. My apartment became mine again. Each morning I brewed my coffee slowly, deliberately inhaling the scent of roasted beans blooming in hot water. I sat by my window overlooking Boston's quiet dawn streets, watching the sun gild the skyline in rose gold. I had never noticed how beautiful the world looked when it wasn't blurred by exhaustion, anxiety, and tears. I started therapy twice a week. At first, I spoke mechanically, recounting facts like reading off a spreadsheet mortgage totals, monthly expenses, years of unspoken resentment. But eventually, my therapist's gentle silence coaxed open the vault inside me. I talked about the little girl who spent hours memorizing spelling words to hold up a cheap gold trophy in front of a father who never looked up. I talked about the teenager who hung medals inside her closet so no one would mock her for seeking pride. I talked about the woman who wired her entire salary into a black hole of unacknowledged sacrifice, believing if she just gave enough, they'd finally see her. Some days I left therapy feeling raw and shaky, as though my bones had been scraped clean. Other days I walked home with a lightness in my chest I didn't recognize. I was learning to breathe again without the constriction of guilt tightening my ribs. One evening in early summer, as the city glowed lavender and gold under the setting sun, Kevin called. His name flashing across my phone screen made my heart clench. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity or maybe hope won. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "Hey," he said quietly. There was a long pause before he continued. "I just wanted to say I know you paid for everything. I know Mom and Dad treated you like shit. I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, letting his words sink into the deepest parts of me. For a fleeting moment, the old reflex rose up, the instinct to soothe, to fix, to tell him it was okay that I'd come back, that I'd keep paying. But I took a deep breath, feeling the solid ground beneath me, and said, "Thank you for saying that. I hope you do help them. They need you." We sat in silence for a while, the hum of the city filling the spaces between our breaths. He didn't say goodbye before he hung up, and neither did I. When the call ended, I felt a small ember of peace toward him. Not love, not yet, but peace. A month later, Mom sent a letter. An actual handwritten letter in her small, careful cursive. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded into a plain white envelope that smelled faintly of her lavender hand cream. She didn't apologize outright. She never used the word sorry, but her words wove around regret like ivy curling around old brick walls. She wrote about her knees aching from shelving books all day, about Dad's frustration working part-time at the hardware store, about Kevin finally stepping up to cover some bills. At the end, she